Good. Well, I think we can get started. Good morning. My name is Stuart Stedman. I'm chair of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. It is now 9:01 a.m. and I'd like to call the July 23rd quarterly board meeting to order. This meeting is being held via video conference. Please be aware that although we're meeting via video conference, this meeting is still being broadcast via the internet. Before we begin, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome those joining us via video conference and ask that they observe the following etiquette. Please state your name before you speak. Mute your microphone when not speaking and keep background noise to a minimum. Members will begin with a roll call to ensure we have a quorum. When I call your name, please respond to confirm that you're on the call. Javed Anwar. It looks like Javed is not here. He'll probably join us in a bit. Cody Campbell.
Here.
Fred Farias.
Here.
Emma Swartz.
Here.
Sam Torn.
Here.
Donna Williams.
Here.
Welcome Wilson.
Here.
And Levi McClaney is not here. And anyway, and neither is Ricky Raven. And I'd like to excuse the absence of Ricky Raven due to duties requiring his attention elsewhere. Do I have a motion to approve Ricky's absence?
Welcome Wilson, so moved.
Emma Schwartz will second.
Motion by Mr. Wilson, second by Ms. Schwartz. Members, when I call your name, please state whether you're voting for or against. Those in favor say aye, those opposed say no. This is for the excuse of Ricky's absence. Mr. Anwar? Mr. Campbell?
For.
Dr. Frias?
Aye.
Ms. Swartz?
Aye.
Mr. Torn?
Aye.
Ms. Williams?
Aye.
Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
I vote aye. Welcome, Javed. We just voted to excuse the absence of Ricky Raven, who has duties he had to attend to elsewhere. So would you vote to approve the excuse of his absence?
Okay. Say that again, Stuart?
Yeah, we just had a motion to excuse the absence of Ricky Raven. He had duties elsewhere. Anyway, I just did a roll call vote, and would you vote aye to agree?
Aye.
Okay, great. Thank you, Javed, and welcome to the board meeting. Please record the meeting's minutes that we have a quorum. Members, to ensure we maintain a quorum, please keep your cameras turned on for the duration of the meeting. The first item is to welcome our new student board member, Levi McClaney. Unfortunately, Levi is in the, I guess, the Army Reserve. Anyway, he's got really duties, major duties required elsewhere, and he's unable to join us. But let me tell you a little bit about him. Levi McClaney of College Station was appointed to the Higher Education Coordinating Board by Governor Abbott in June 2020. He will serve as the student representative through May 31st, 2021. Levi is a PhD candidate in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Texas A&M University in College Station. Additionally, he's an officer in the United States Reserve, currently serving in the Aviation Battalion in Conroe, Texas as a Black Hawk pilot. He's a research assistant in the Department of Electrical Engineering at Texas A&M and is currently collaborating with the Army Research Lab on research areas of interest to the Department of Defense. He focuses on artificial intelligence methodologies and applications in material systems. Levi holds a Bachelor and Master's of Science in Electrical Engineering from Texas A&M, completed in 2015 and 2016, respectively. He was formerly a member of the Corps of Cadets, a member of B Company, and was founding member of C Company. As a student at Texas A&M, he sat on numerous advisory boards, including the Student Affairs Fee Advisory Board, the Student Organization Funding Assistance Board, and the Recreational Sports Advisory Committee. While pursuing his master's degree, he was selected to serve as Executive Vice President of the Texas A&M Student Government the same year in which he helped found the Texas A&M University Career Closet, a student organization dedicated to providing free business professional attire rental to students in need of job interviews and career fairs. He is a 2018 recipient of the Buckwire Spirit Award for outstanding service to Texas A&M campus community, and recently completed a year-long term as a student regent to the Texas A&M University System Board of Regents. That's just ridiculous. Okay, I mean, anyway, I talked to Levi, welcomed him on the board, and so I said, okay, well, in electrical engineering, there's I know that this is what little I knew. There's a power grid track and there's a computer track. So which one are you on? Well, I'm on the computer track. And then he got into the difference between hardware track within computers and software. And once he started getting into algorithms, he completely lost me. But anyway, he's a great addition to the board, and hopefully everybody will meet him in October. Okay, next on the agenda is agenda item IB, Commissioner's Remarks. Commissioner will provide his remarks today on some of the agenda items we'll be discussing today. Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. I'm happy to be with you all today. So, of course, I'm very much looking forward to when we can all meet together in person. At our April meeting, we were just beginning to grapple with COVID-19 crisis, and at that time, I didn't expect that we would have another round of virtual meetings be necessary now. But today we'll talk in greater detail about the impact of COVID-19 to Texas higher education, and of course about the governor's commitment of GEAR funding support during our major policy conversation. But I do want to take a moment at the beginning of this meeting to thank Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Speaker Bonin, and the leadership of the Senate Finance and House Appropriations Committees for their leadership and support. And I also want to acknowledge the extraordinary efforts of our higher education leaders and partners across the state for everything they're doing to keep our students progressing towards earning their higher education credentials. So while COVID-19 has been a major area of focus for everyone over the last 4 months, we've also been hard at work on other major priorities to advance Texas higher education, and several of those are on the agenda today. So for example, yesterday, the IDEA Committee discussed a rule change that'll come before you for approval today about improving access to our education research centers. Now, this may seem like a relatively niche issue, but it's one that's particularly important not only during COVID-19, but also for the kinds of research partnerships that we'll be able to participate in going forward. This change will allow our education researchers to have secure remote access to data from the education research centers so they can continue to pursue important research projects using Texas higher education, public education, and workforce data. This is something that researchers have been requesting for quite some time, and your approval today will be a timely and very important change. Also, yesterday you heard from Deputy Commissioner Lori Fye about our data infrastructure modernization project. One of my top priorities as commissioner is improving our data to make it more accessible and actionable for institutions, policymakers, and the public. The state of Texas is the envy of most states in collecting data that spans K-12 higher education and the workforce. However, these data aren't necessarily accessible and useful to people when they're making important decisions, from students and their families to institutional leaders to leaders in regional economic development or state policymakers. So our vision is to deploy a new state educational and workforce data infrastructure that emphasizes the use of data as actionable intelligence to support decision-making and to facilitate ongoing improvement for the benefit of students and families, institutions, and the state. I'm very excited that we're launching this major initiative to improve our Texas educational and workforce data infrastructure, working in close partnership with institutions, other agencies, particularly the Texas Workforce Commission and TEA, and other stakeholders. So Texas will have a modern, user-centered approach to data that includes better online tools, interactive reports, and dashboards. Finally, on today's agenda, we have some important items related to transfer. So this spring, before the COVID crisis hit, I'd asked Dr. James Hallmark and Jacob Ferrari to help us examine potential stumbling blocks for students around transfer and to explore options that Texas could consider to make the process and our policies more streamlined for students and for institutions. And I'm very excited for you to hear from Dr. Hallmark and from Jacob Ferrari on the progress of their working group. So as you all recall, last session, Senate Bill 25 was a high priority for the legislature. This agency in our institutions. And we continue to make progress on implementing the key components of that legislation. But now I'm confident that these recent conversations will help us continue to build on that groundwork laid by SB 25 to make transfer much more transparent and efficient for our students across the state. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking forward to the discussions today about these and other important issues for the board's consideration.
Great, thank you. I noticed that Levi, you have been able to join us.
Yes, sir, I have. Apologize for being a little tardy.
That's okay. Did you, so basically I took up most of the morning reading your bio. It kind of went on and on. And so anyway, we'd like to welcome you to the coordinating board. And would you like to say a few words just about your interest in higher education?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, my interest in higher education really came about. I have quite, I was talking to Dr. Keller about this a few days ago, but just have quite the background in higher education, mostly from being a student that's kind of been through all walks, undergraduate, graduate school, paid for college with loans, had the military help out with some. Now I'm on a graduate fellowship, so I've kind of been through all sorts of different processes as far as being a student is concerned, and really wanted an opportunity to be able to give back. And had the opportunity to serve as a Texas A&M student regent last year, and it was an incredible opportunity. I enjoyed every second of it. When the opportunity to serve on the coordinating board came out, I didn't have to think twice about it, applied immediately, and I'm honored to be here today and honored to be working with yourself and Dr. Keller and to be addressing these issues, especially in the times that we're facing right now with all the different issues that students are facing and higher education as a whole is facing. It's an incredible time to be a part of an organization like this and be a part of a vision setting organization such as the coordinating board. So thank you very much for having me. Extremely excited for the opportunity.
Well, that's great. And I look forward to your perspective. I mean, the student debt issue is a big one. But, one of the things that is really important personally to me is the value of research. And of course, we talked, when I called you on your phone about the research you're doing and how it might impact not only science, but the sort of the ecosystem around, a research university. So anyway, look forward to your input and look forward to meeting you in person. Thanks. Levi.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Let's see, the next item, agenda item is public testimony. We do not have anyone registered to testify today, so we'll go on to the next item. Next agenda item is approval of minutes from previous meetings. Do I have a motion to approve the meetings for the April board meeting?
So moved. Sam Torn.
Motion by Mr. Torn. I have a second.
Second, Donna Williams.
Second by Ms. Williams. Members, when I call your name, please state whether you're voting for or against. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. Mr. Anwar?
Aye.
Mr. Campbell?
Aye.
Dr. Farias? I think that's,
Aye.
and I could read your lips, but I guess you have to actually say it. Ms. Swartz?
Aye.
Mr. Torn?
Aye.
Ms. Williams?
Aye.
Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
As well, motion passes. So we've approved the minutes. Do I have a motion for the approval of minutes for the May special called board meeting?
Aye.
Okay, that's a motion by Mr. Anwar. Do I have a second?
Second is Donna Williams.
Second by Ms. Williams. Members, when I call your name, please state whether you're voting for or against. Mr. Anwar?
Aye.
Mr. Campbell?
Aye.
Dr. Farias?
Aye.
Ms. Swartz?
Aye.
Mr. Torn?
Aye.
Ms. Williams?
Aye.
Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Motion passes. Next is the consent calendar for the entire meeting. The consent calendar includes non-controversial items that we think we can approve without comment or discussion. This allows us to save time for other items that need more of our attention. Highlighted items in gray are the consent items on the agenda. I want to point out we have often placed rules on the consent calendar given the extensive vetting process that they go through. However, due to current circumstances, we have placed additional items on the consent calendar for this meeting. You all have had time to review these items, and of course, any board member can request that an agenda item be removed from the consent calendar. This will give us the opportunity to discuss that item or items more fully later in the meeting. Items on the consent calendar today are, and I've been told I really have to read all of these, but it will save time. Agenda item 7B, consideration of approving the committee's recommendation to change Committee of Affordability, Accountability, and Planning to the Committee on Innovation, Data, Education, and Educational Analytics, wherever it appears in the board rules. Agenda item 7C, review of facilities projects that were submitted to the coordinating board. Agenda item 7D, consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the report on the Texas Grant Program. Texas Educational Code 56.311C1. Agenda item 9H, consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to changes in the lower division academic course guide manual. Agenda item 9I, consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the report on the autism grant program. Agenda item 9K, consideration of adopting committee's recommendation to the board relating to the report on the effectiveness of the Open Educational Resource Grant Program, Senate Bill 810, 85th Legislature, regular session, and House Bill 1, Rider 55, 86th Texas Legislature, regular session. Agenda item 9L, consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the January 2020 annual compliance reports for institutions under certificate of authorization, names beginning with A through O. Agenda item 9M, 1 through 3. Consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to request for a new degree program. The University of Texas at Arlington Bachelor's of Arts in Philanthropy, University of North Texas Master of Science in Data Engineering, University of Houston Downtown Master of Professional Accountancy in Professional Accountancy. Agenda item 9N, consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the issuance of request for offers for the development and ongoing support of an online pre-assessment activity. Agenda item 9O, 1 and 2, consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the issuance of request for applications for the Graduate Medical Expansion Program and the Nursing, Allied Health, and other health-related educational grant program. Agenda item 9P, 1 through 5, consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to appointment of members to 1, the Learning Technology Advisory Committee, 2, the Lower Division Academic Course Guide Manual Advisory Committee, 3, the Workforce Education Course Manual Advisory Committee, 4, the Certification Advisory Committee, 5, Apply Texas Advisory Committee. Agenda item 9Q, report on institutional request acted on by the commissioner or assistant commissioner since the last board meeting. Agenda item 10B, reports on grants and contracts. Agenda item 10C, consideration of adopting committee's recommendation to the board regarding approval to 1, issue a request for qualification to conduct the audit of an agency-wide financial statements for fiscal year ended August 31st, 2020, and 2, enter into a contract with the selected auditing firm subject to the approval of the board chair, vice chair, and chair of the agency operations committee with options to renew the contract for up to 10 additional years. Agenda item 9D, consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the annual internal audit plan for fiscal year 2021. Agenda item 10E, consideration of adopting committee's recommendation to the board relating to the annual compliance monitoring plan for fiscal year 2021. Agenda item 10F, consideration of adopting amendments to the board operating policies and procedures. At this time, I would like to add the following items to the consent calendar, and those items were discussed yesterday at the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success. Agenda item 9B, report to the board on the activities of the Family Practice Residency Advisory Committee, including the report on trustee funds distributed in fiscal year 2020. Agenda item 9C, report to the board on activities of Learning Technology Advisory Committee. Agenda item 9D, report to the board on the activities of the Lower Division Academic Course Guide Manual Advisory Committee. Agenda item 9E, report to the board on the activities of medical education and graduate medical education programs. Agenda item 9F, report to the board on activities of the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee. Agenda item 9G, consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the distribution of funds trustee to the coordinating board to support the family practice residency programs for fiscal year 2021. Okay, so are there any items that anyone wants to remove from the consent calendar?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
this is Fred. I just wanted to clarify on agenda item 10C, consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board regarding approval on number 3, or number 2, actually, where it said enter the contract with selected auditing firm subject to approval of the board chair, vice chair, and chair of the agency operations committee with options to renew the contract. It's up to 3 additional years. I'm not so sure I heard 3. I may have heard a different number. That's why I just wanted to clarify that it's 3.
Yeah, with options to renew the contract for up to 3 additional years. That was in the very middle of this soliloquy.
I thought I heard 10. So I thought I heard you say 10. So for the record,
Okay.
we'll
Thank
let
you.
the secretary verify that just to make sure.
Thank you for that clarification. I was kind of running out of gas about that point. But anyway, so.
With all that information, thank you.
Okay, so I'm hearing that nobody would like to add items to the consent calendar or actually remove items to the consent calendar. Anybody want to add items to the consent calendar? Hearing none, do I have a motion for approval of the consent calendar as amended?
So move, Fred.
Motion by Dr. Reyes.
Emma Schwartz will second.
A second by Ms. Schwartz. Members, when I call your name, please state whether you're voting for or against. Mr. Anwar.
In the location bar, it's not coming over.
Javed, I see you're on mute. Well, I'll come back to Mr. Anwar. Mr. Campbell?
4.
Dr. Farias?
4.
Ms. Schwartz?
4.
Mr. Torn?
4.
Ms. Williams?
4.
Mr. Wilson?
4.
And I vote for as well. Mr. Anwar?
For.
Okay. Motion passes. Okay, the next item is the major agenda item 5A is the major policy discussion. This is one of my favorite parts of any board meeting and being on the coordinating board actually. The agenda item 5A is major policy discussion. They're topics of interest where staff, policy experts, and/or stakeholders provide coordinating board members with information on higher education policy matters or initiatives that have potential to impact Texas statewide. The major policy discussion for this meeting will be a focus on COVID-19. Dr. Harrison Keller, Commissioner of Higher Education, Ray Martinez, Deputy Commissioner for Academic Affairs, Workforce Education, and Melissa Henderson, Associate Commissioner for Development and Executive Director of the Foundation, will present this item and be available for question. Mr. Commissioner Keller will begin this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate this opportunity to talk with you all today about the impact of COVID-19 on Texas higher education. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused tremendous hardships around the world. It's impacted our physical health, our behavioral health, and our economic stability. It continues to take an immense toll on Texas, and its full impact and associated costs are still unknown, but we know that those effects are being acutely felt by Texas students and their families, by Texas colleges and universities, and by our communities. This is the greatest disruption to Texas higher education since the end of the Second World War. Now, as you all heard yesterday, summer online enrollments were generally higher than we expected, with a couple of important caveats. There's been a broad range, a lot of variance across institutions, and also those enrollments were generally down in career and technical programs, especially as those programs slowly ramped up in-person instruction. We know that our higher education institutions and our students continue to experience financial shocks, And the evolving nature of this pandemic means that our students and institutions face continued uncertainty as we head into the fall. And of course, we're all hoping that institutions will successfully be able to have students on campus throughout the fall semester, but we don't know yet what the future will bring. And all the institutions are planning for multiple scenarios. Despite these challenges, our Texas higher education institutions continue to rise to the challenge of the moment. They've stayed committed to the mission of higher education, and most of all, they've stayed committed to their students. And again, I want to commend our institutions for their extraordinary efforts to adapt to these changing environments while prioritizing the needs of their students. Now, with your permission, I'd like to ask Deputy Commissioner Ray Martinez to talk in more detail about our work to support institutions in navigating the COVID-19 crisis. And then Associate Commissioner Melissa Henderson will share some of the important work that the Foundation's been engaged in to support our students and our institutions. Ray?
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, Chairman Stedman, Vice Chair Fadiez, and board members. Texas institutions of higher education continue to take proactive measures to protect the health and safety of all students, faculty, staff, and campus visitors during this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. As Commissioner Keller has stated, the primary role of the coordinating board in this public health emergency is to act as a facilitator, a partner, and an advocate for institutions of higher education. More specifically, Commissioner Keller has charged agency staff with serving as a resource to all Texas colleges and universities to help collect information about and to address the challenges they're facing in response to the disruption caused by COVID-19. To work with Governor Greg Abbott's office, with state leadership, and other agencies to ensure maximum flexibility of rules and regulations to help institutions adapt to the current public health emergency, and to collaborate closely with public and private institutions of higher education across the state to adapt to the changes that may be needed to ensure continuity of instruction for students through the spring semester, through our current summer sessions, and of course, as we prepare for the coming fall semester. Very briefly, I'll provide some examples of how we've carried out this mandate to serve as a resource and to respond with flexibility to all higher education institutions across the state. So very early in the COVID-19 pandemic, as far back as late January, Commissioner Keller began sending communications to higher education institutions urging awareness and preparation of the emerging public health crisis. In mid-February, Commissioner Keller asked me to serve as the agency lead for the coronavirus response. In early March, with the assistance and support of various agency personnel, we quickly developed a COVID-19 resource webpage that today includes links to a large number of resources and reference documents. The agency's COVID-19 webpage is updated continuously as new information becomes available, and it has become one of the most visited web pages on our agency's website. Concurrent to developing our COVID-19 webpage, at the Commissioner's direction, we also assembled a group of senior agency personnel, today known as the FAQ Work Group, that began meeting daily to consider a high volume of questions that the agency has been receiving from higher education institutions throughout the state. The first meeting of the FAQ Work Group was back on March the 11th, and this work group has met continuously each week ever since. As of today, the agency has curated over 80 FAQs, providing guidance, checklists, and related information to assist public and private higher ed institutions navigate the challenges associated with COVID-19. The second way we're serving as a resource to higher ed institutions is to maintain continuous and close contact with the higher education community across the state. It's important to note something that the Commissioner Keller has emphasized, including this morning, and from the very beginning of this global health pandemic, and that is for higher education, the COVID-19 crisis has been enormously disruptive for campus operations on an unprecedented scale. Thus, one of the most important things we can do as an agency in response to this public health crisis is to maintain constant, deliberate communications with higher education institutions throughout the state. Commissioner Keller, of course, maintains frequent and consistent communications with presidents and chancellors to provide support during this crisis. The Commissioner and agency staff have participated in numerous higher education briefings for legislative and government relations staff to update stakeholders on important issues impacting higher education. And likewise, since March, I have participated in daily and now weekly calls with all of the presidents and chancellors of our Texas community colleges. I also maintain frequent contact with representatives from our independent colleges and universities and our state technical colleges to provide an avenue for discussion, concerns, and feedback. And finally, our agency continues to fulfill our obligation to serve as a resource by providing timely, well-researched guidance on the reopening of core campus operations. In late April, Governor Abbott announced the governor's strike force to reopen Texas, in which the commissioner serves as the higher education working group leader, and he works closely with the governor's office, higher education leaders, and other stakeholders, including members of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick's task force to reopen Texas. In coordination with state leadership and members of the governor's strike force, Commissioner Keller, along with agency leadership, have worked to develop guidance and minimal health protocols to help inform institutions across the state on how to safely and gradually reopen various components of core campus operations. Importantly, our reopening guidance is predicated on the following. First, we provide minimal recommended health protocols, allowing institutions the flexibility to impose stricter protocols depending on circumstances in their local campus area. Two, we have encouraged institutions to develop campus-specific reopening plans in close consultation with local, regional, and state health officials, and to make these reopening plans for their specific campuses public so that students, faculty, and staff can make informed decisions. And three, the agency's recommended minimal health protocols are informed by various well-researched sources, including the CDC, the American College Health Association, and our close consultation with other states who are developing similar reopening guidance. In all cases, prior to finalizing the agency's reopening guidance, it is reviewed not only by the medical doctors advising the governor's strike force, but also by various higher education institutional leaders who have provided extremely helpful feedback and suggestions. And thus far, we've had 3 iterations of reopening guidance that have now been made public by our agency. The first was an FAQ and related checklist for the reopening of components of career and technical education programs that required in-person instruction. We asked for a signed certification by the CEO of any campus that was going to reopen any aspect of CTE programs to in-person instruction, and we've had really good cooperation from all higher ed institutions across the state. This first iteration of reopening guidance was issued back on May the 4th. The second iteration was an FAQ and related checklist or minimal health protocols for the safe and gradual reopening of various core campus operations during summer sessions. This guidance recommended that institutions of higher education keep most instructional components fully online for the first summer session, and depending on local conditions, move forward with gradual reopening of on-campus instruction, again, depending on what was happening in their local region with regard to COVID-19. And finally, the third iteration of an FAQ and related checklist for the safe and gradual reopening of core campus operations was actually issued by our agency just this past Monday, and it pertains to the fall semester. And again, we have posted minimal health protocols, which is a revised version of health protocols that also includes dining services and campus residence facilities. So, Mr. Chairman, this concludes my report. I will next call on Melissa Henderson, Associate Commissioner for Development and the Executive Director of the Texas Higher Education Foundation. But before I do, I'd be happy to address any questions you or any members have.
Let's go and Melissa, why don't you go ahead and present, and then we can take questions after your presentation.
Absolutely. And Mary's going to pull up the slides. Thank you. Thank you, Ray. Good morning, Chairman Stedman, Vice Chair Farias, and board members. This morning, I have the privilege of sharing with you some of the work in which the foundation has been engaged to support students and institutions during this time of unprecedented need through the Texas Emergency Aid Grant Program. Next slide. As the scope of the COVID-19 pandemic began to take shape earlier this spring, we as a foundation and as an agency began to examine how the foundation could quickly take action to support institutions and students during this time. We worked closely with the Texas Association of Community Colleges, the Council of Public University Presidents and Chancellors, and the independent colleges and universities of Texas. And I want to take a moment to thank them for their partnership in helping to shape this initiative. Through working closely with them and our philanthropic partners, including our anchor funding partners, Greater Texas Foundation and Trellis Foundation, who I would also like to take a moment to thank for their commitment to this work, we launched this initiative with two goals in mind. One, provide flexible resources to institutions to be able to fill gaps in emergency student aid funds to serve the needs of their students as a result of disruptions related to COVID-19. And you can see outlined here some of the common areas of utilization for those funds, including emergency aid for costs such as healthcare, support for more indirect services such as food pantries. Food insecurity was a need that was raised across many of our applying campuses. And of course, as you can imagine, technology supports for things like laptops, hotspots, et cetera. And two, to provide capacity building supports to institutions for their emergency aid programs. In particular, what we heard from our community college partners was that prior to the pandemic, many colleges didn't have emergency aid programs in place. And so we wanted to make sure that while we were providing these flexible resources, that we were also providing informational resources, including research, best practice, tools, and sample documents to our institutional partners to support them in that way as well. And we were fortunate to be able to partner with Trellis Company to conduct a series of webinars for our grantees, addressing areas such as promising practices for program development, how to best communicate with students, developing holistic student supports and sustainability. We're also providing deeper one-on-one technical assistance to 4 institutions to support their efforts. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we were fortunate to secure anchor funding from the Greater Texas Foundation in the amount of $500,000, the Trellis Foundation in the amount of $200,000, and individual donations just north of $13,000 to date. And in May, we were able to award $710,000 in grants to 57 of the 121 institutions that applied across all 10 regions of the state. Those grants were in the amounts of $10,000, $15,000, and $20,000. And we prioritized the awarding of those grants first and foremost based on financial need of the student body of the institutions as measured by the percentage of students receiving Pell Grants, with different weights for universities and community colleges, because we know there are differences between the two as we think about students receiving Pell Grants, and we wanted to make sure that we were treating that equitably. The size of the grant was based on the student enrollment, so the larger the institution, the larger the grant. 36 of the $10,000 grants were awarded, 14 of the $15,000 grants, and 7 $20,000 grants. And across the sectors, 29 of those grants went to community colleges, 16 to public universities, and 12 to our ICUT institutions. Additionally, moving forward, we'll be asking institutions to report back to the foundation student level data where applicable, so depending on how they utilize those funds, so that we can better understand student outcomes as it relates to continued enrollment. Next slide. And finally, I just wanted to give you one institutional example that we saw from those 121 applications, because I think it really highlights some of the themes that we saw across the application. So within this one from a rural public university, you can see that this institution was seeing needs across all 3 areas that we saw. And I think highlights the need for these resources to be flexible so that institutions could determine how best to support their students. So this institution saw needs from their students related to direct student support to help them pay their bills as it relates to COVID-19 disruptions, food insecurity, and technology support. So wanted to make sure to give you that example. So moving forward, fundraising is ongoing. With additional resources, we'll be able to provide additional grants without asking institutions to reapply. Our goal is to create a $2 million public-private partnership that would allow us to provide grants to all of the institutions that applied. And we're also seeking funding to document and analyze key insights from the 121 applications received to highlight student needs exposed and exacerbated by COVID-19 and lessons learned through this initiative. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions and then would like to turn it back to the commissioner.
You know, members, do you have any questions of either Commissioner Keller, Ray Martinez, or Melissa Henderson?
Mr. Chairman, this is Welcome Wilson. With regard, Ray, with regard to the different, we're allowing each university based on their unique situation to develop their own COVID policies. Are we tracking those, and do we have a method of, if we identify best practices or good ideas, that we would share those with other state institutions, if we, so that everybody benefits from creative solutions?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question, Mr. Wilson. I failed to mention, but you're exactly right. We actually, what we did when we posted on Monday the third iteration of our reopening guidance, we actually created a new web page that puts all of our reopening guidance onto one page, so that you can go to that page and you can get all three of the checklists that we have posted for CTE programs for summer and now for fall. You can see the FAQ that we posted again for each iteration, CTE, summer, and fall. But we've also added something else that the commissioner had asked us to do, and that is to compile the reopening plans for institutions of higher education across the state and divide them by sector and put these plans, have links to these plans on our website to allow for institutions to hear or to read what other institutions are doing and to learn from each other. And so if you go to that webpage, you will actually see we have Excel spreadsheets that we have compiled that has the reopening plans for as many institutions as have posted them. Not everybody has made public their fall reopening plans, but for those that have, we have a link, not just to their COVID update page, but to their specific fall reopening plan. And all of that is contained right now on our website. In terms of best practices, absolutely. That's part of the reason to post all of these fall reopening plans, so that everybody can learn from each other. But the truth is also that we've learned from the very collaborative process in developing our own checklist, because we have in draft form shared the checklist with higher education leaders across the state, so that they can tell us, here's what they need to hear about, here's what they need guidance on. And we've learned from that, but also, as I said in my remarks, from other states. I participate in phone calls with chief academic officers from a multitude of states, at least once a month, if not more frequently. And the primary piece of conversation in those discussions is, how is everybody responding to COVID in their respective states? So we've learned a lot from collaborating and sharing resources with other states. So I hope that's responsive to your question, but I'm glad you raised that, because I do want you all to know that we have those links posted to our website.
That's really great. Mr. Chairman, as usual, the staff is way ahead of all the rest of us. So congratulations.
Well, it's a critical part. I mean, this is just an aspect of overall mission of the coordinating board. I mean, to look at best practices, in this case, COVID-19 response, but really just educational delivery. And so that's excellent. Ray, you're doing great work.
Thank you.
This is
yes.
Yes, I think that the website that you all have developed is very thorough and has a lot of information, which I think has been lagging in so many areas of the pandemic. And so this is a really phenomenal resource, and hopefully it will continue to evolve as you learn from best practices, and as we learn scientifically from the scientific community about the virus and what's going on from a public health perspective. And so congratulations to you all for this great work and being such a great resource. And frankly, I do think that this is going to help us all evolve and innovate incredibly in the education field. And so it'll be exciting to see what comes from a positive perspective from this.
Thank you.
Yeah, Emma, that last point is really important, because that disruption and the responding innovation, a lot of the things are going to stick, and I think ultimately will make higher education more efficient and more effective for the long term. Melissa, I guess I have a question.
Of course.
So you took the one rural example. I guess there's got to be a lot of variation when these institutions get the money for student aid, emergency student aid. Um, I presume there's some that really get it out. In other words, it's an informational issue. You know, who do you get it to, and how do you know that students are in need? And therein lies, it would seem like an opportunity to also kind of create best practices that
Yes.
institutions can learn from. So can you speak from that about that?
Absolutely. And that's a big part of the reason why we wanted to partner with Trellis Company to conduct the webinars. To your point, there is research, although emergency aid, I would say, is a newer area as it relates to financial aid than many other areas of financial aid. But we wanted to make sure that institutions were receiving resources, informational resources around those best practices. What does the research say about emergency aid? How do you effectively communicate to students, especially given that students aren't directly in front of you on campus? How do you do that remotely? What are the messages that resonate with students? How do you provide those student supports that we know are so critical? And that was really the impetus behind wanting to provide those institutional capacity building resources as well, so that we were making sure to get those best practices into the hands of institutions that are doing this work day in and day out. And then that also goes to what I was mentioning about that we're also looking at resources to be able to document and analyze what we're learning from this experience and this initiative, so that we can continue to add to that body of understanding around best practices and resources for institutions to continue that learning moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. As we talked about, you know, that effort, when you were talking about my role as a trustee of the foundation, yes, it does warm my heart that we are helping students. But the real thing that excites me is trying to figure out, okay, where, you know, whether it's COVID or not, you know, how do we get emergency student aid to students so they will persist? It's a very important thing, and I'm sure some institutions do it better than others. Members, any other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
I have a question.
Oh, sure, Mr. Torn.
It seems to me that the response, the COVID response for institutions of higher education in the state of Texas in terms of calendaring was to made very early and to move their start date up and in before Thanksgiving. Okay. And I understand that. Of course, circumstances have changed. On the other hand, the K through 12's response is exactly the opposite, and is to move their start date back. And I understand we're concerned with higher education, but I just wonder if the gap between those two causes any issues that someone needs to be coordinated and be aware of.
So this is, you raise an important point, Mr. Torn, is the principal reason that we've seen residential campuses move their start date earlier is because we have had students, when they go home for Thanksgiving, then they'll interact with more folks, and it's harder for the campuses to manage and to contain exposure. So it ends up being safer for the residential campuses to shift the start date earlier, and then not have the students come back physically onto campus after Thanksgiving. Of course, little different set of circumstances on the K-12 side. And what we were seeing is more and more of the K-12 districts announce that they're going to start online.
Any other questions? I think Dr. Frias, did you have a question or comment?
It was answered. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, before we move on, if I could, I'd like to talk a little bit about the announcement yesterday.
Yeah.
Just to build on this conversation. So, and I have to say that Deputy Commissioner Ray Martinez and his team have really done exceptional work in supporting our campuses and doing it in a way that's very collaborative, working with state and national experts, looking at the data, talking with the doctors, drawing on the best national resources, and also sharing our Texas resources with other states. And then Melissa Henderson has done a terrific job, not only with the foundation, but also in supporting the governor's efforts to coordinate childcare for first responders and essential personnel. And so I wanted to call out those efforts and those accomplishments. Of course, it's ongoing, but we deeply appreciate their work. And as we look ahead from the immediate response to thinking about recovery, so over the past several months, we've also been working hard to make the case that higher education is going to have a special role and responsibility to play in driving the state's economic recovery. As you all know, in today's economy, jobs increasingly follow skills. Our expectation is that the current crisis will accelerate some of those changes. And I fundamentally believe that higher education can offer a remedy for financial pain that a lot of Texans are now experiencing, and provide us a path towards a stronger, more resilient workforce for the future. So yesterday, Governor Abbott announced an additional $118 million in federal funding for critical higher education programs and initiatives, which is on top of $57 million that had been announced earlier this month to maintain our major need-based financial aid program. So this $175 million commitment of federal funding will be very important, especially for helping students stay enrolled, stay on path to completion, and to help Texans who are experiencing economic hardship. So yesterday's announcement is the product of many discussions and effective, strong collaboration among Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Speaker Bonin, and a bipartisan group of legislative leaders and senior staff. And I'm deeply appreciative of their support, especially in the governor's office. Brady Franks and Sarah Hicks have been terrific partners in this work. So with the support of our state leaders and the partnership of our institutions, I believe that Texas could be a national model for using federal stimulus funds for strategic investments in higher ed to provide critical support for students and help the economy recover more quickly. So briefly, I'd like to discuss each of those major initiatives that this GEAR funding will support. So first, the majority of these funds, about $150 million, will provide emergency educational support, financial aid for students who are at risk of leaving or foregoing higher education. So the first component of this was announced at the beginning of the month. That's $57 million to maintain the state's need-based financial aid programs. That includes Texas grants, the TEOG, and the TEG to help keep our students enrolled at their colleges and universities. In addition to that $57 million, another $93 million will support enrollment and re-enrollment support at our public colleges and universities for students either stopped out or at risk of dropping out of college. So the first half of that will be dedicated to additional emergency financial aid for students who are at risk of leaving or foregoing higher education because their families have suffered financial loss. Some of the additional capacity that institutions have stood up with support from the foundation is going to be very important in making sure that these dollars are used effectively. The second half is going to be used to provide targeted support for people who need to reskill and upskill, including displaced workers who might need additional training to get back into the workforce, and people who have some college but no credential and are within 12 months of completion. So we know that right now, people without post-secondary credentials are especially vulnerable. The unemployment rates for workers without post-secondary credentials, including folks with some college and no credential, are more than twice the rates of the unemployment rates for workers with bachelor's degrees. So we've been calling for the majority of GEAR funds to follow adversely impacted students to campuses, and I'm grateful that we'll be able to move forward with this proposal. This additional emergency financial aid is going to help tens of thousands of adversely impacted students stay on track or return to higher education so they can unlock their potential, help provide for their families, and contribute to the state's economic recovery. Although we're going to need to work closely with institutions and with our policymakers on logistics of how these aid funds are distributed, we anticipate that the funding is going to be distributed directly to public institutions leveraging the state's existing grant aid distribution mechanisms. Second, Governor Abbott approved about $15 million for strategic data infrastructure. As we talked about during the IDEA committee yesterday, and as I mentioned earlier, coordinating board sits on a wealth of data, but it hasn't been accessible or actionable for institutions, policymakers, and other stakeholders. So this funding support is going to provide a critical jumpstart to our efforts to improve the availability and the use of educational and workforce data. And it'll allow Texas to better inform and support students and families on their paths to credentials and into the workforce, while also providing our institutions and stakeholders with more actionable intelligence. This strategic data infrastructure funding is also going to include support for interactive and virtual advising tools that'll help students map out their most efficient paths to earning a credential, and will be even more important during the current COVID-19 environment. And then finally, the third component includes $10 million for significantly improving online instruction and reducing cost to students. So we'll draw on lessons that we've learned about strategies for scaling effective online instruction, and we'll support our institutions in improving their online offerings, especially for the courses that most Texas students take and that are most frequently transferred among institutions. So these funds are primarily going to be used to support faculty teams and campus support units to get behind these local innovators to create and improve digital resources that can be shared across institutions. So again, I'm grateful to the governor and to the legislature for entrusting the coordinating board with these funds and with organizing these important state efforts. So I'm in regular communication with counterparts around the country. And my impression is that in most places, the discussions about GEAR funds have been more about backfilling than about treating higher education as a critical part of the solution for economic recovery. So I'm enthusiastic about this opportunity for Texas to go in a different direction. I think these investments are going to translate into real returns for our students, our institutions, and our communities, not someday, but within the next 12 months. And they also, this commitment also makes a profound statement about the importance of higher education to Texas. So again, as Texas transitions from immediate response efforts like you've just heard about to thinking about economic recovery, our mission to provide clear pathways to high value credentials and to produce highly skilled, well-educated graduates for the workforce is going to be more important than ever. And at the agency, we're excited to partner with and support our institutions in this work for Texas students and their families, for their communities, and to help demonstrate the value of higher education and build momentum as we approach the upcoming legislative session and position the state for a brighter future. So finally, I also want to say, Mr. Chairman, thank you to you, thank you to Vice Chairman Frias, and to the board for your strong support. I'm looking forward to the work ahead and happy to answer any questions about this new component of our work.
Well, what's really amazing, and I think all board members, if you haven't seen it already, this fabric that the commissioner is weaving is very important. So you know, we had the foundation, the Higher Education Foundation, which, you know, of course, Harrison views as a significant asset, you know, distribute emergency aid. Well, that's like a pilot, you know, so that when you get GEAR funding for emergency aid, you know, these institutions, you know, you have maybe best practices or a kind of a dry run. When you have, you know, reskilling and upskilling or students dropping out, this data infrastructure is really, really important to identify those students. And so, you know, if you look at it at this fabric that he's weaving, it is really, really exciting, where each part, you know, really helps another part. And I think you're right, Commissioner, that you know, your approach, rather than just fill in budget gaps because of declining revenue, but rather you know, create this fabric of higher education to make it better. I think, you know, Texas will lead as a result of those efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree. You know, again, what we see across the country is mostly states are announcing massive cuts to higher education, and of course we've we're looking at some budget cuts here in Texas, but this kind of commitment, this makes an important statement.
Any other comments or questions? Anyway, very, very, very exciting stuff. Excellent, excellent work, and really thank the governor's staff, the governor, the legislative, the legislators that were involved in this process. That is a huge boon for higher education, and I think, as you can see, the target of these funds is really important, and an investment, huge investment for the future of higher education and higher education in Texas. All right, thank you very much. Let's see, next item on the agenda is, let's see, agenda item 6A is an update on approving transfer in Texas. This is an information item only. Dr. James Hallmark, Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs, Texas A&M System, and Jacob Fadi, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Texas Association of Community Colleges, will provide an update on activities of improving transfer in the Texas work group, and will be available to answer any questions. Dr. Hallmark, Mr. Fadi, welcome.
Thank you.
Or Dr. Hallmark, my apologies.
Well, that's quite all right. I've been called much worse. I believe, is Jacob on the line?
I'm here, Dr.
Oh, good.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the board. It's my pleasure to join Dr. Hallmark in this presentation. I'm Jacob Frey, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Texas Association of Community Colleges. Chairman, before we dive into the important conversation of policy, transfer policy, I would like to add my gratitude on behalf of the 50 college districts to Commissioner Keller and his outstanding team. You just finished having a conversation about the COVID-19 health crisis. I can tell you that the leadership at the coordinating board has been nothing short but exceptional to this process. As you might imagine, none of our institutions have experienced this kind of disruption to our processes, to our learning, to our teaching, and to have the kind of partnership that we have with Dr. Keller and Deputy Commissioner Martinez and the team there has been exceptional. And so on behalf of my colleges, we want to recognize him and thank you for that partnership. I'm going to jump in and get us started. And so Dr. Hallmark and I are going to be tag teaming for this presentation. And so as you look across the screen, forgive us if we're doing a little bit of a ping pong. So hopefully it won't be too much of a whiplash for your eyeballs as we come through this process. But let me get started, Chairman, with maybe an optimistic lens to the problem statement that we're going to address through this work group. And that is that there is good groundwork already in Texas with regards to the transfer issue, the transfer equation. Let me start maybe with a term definition. When we mean vertical transfer, we're talking about students who transfer from a community college to a university. Some of the conversations that we're going to have may at some point apply to university transfers, but that is not the focus of this conversation. We're talking about community college students transferring to university. So community colleges enroll 70% of all first year and second year students in our great state of Texas. They are by all means a great gateway for students who are pursuing whether an associate's degree or a baccalaureate degree. And so we think that the transfer policy, the transfer conversation really is an important conversation to realize the potential of our great state and our Texans that are coming into the academy. Two data points that I think allows us a sense of optimism. If you look at university graduates in Texas, 34% of university graduates have at least 30 credit hours of community college credit in their transcript before they graduate from university. 70% of university graduates have some community college in their transcript. And so we already know that some of the process, some of the systems, some of our conversations are working well for that subset of students. And I think now the part of the conversation is how do we optimize that potential on behalf of the rest of the students. And so I will pause there and then ask Dr. Hallmark.
Thank you, Jacob. And if you'd move to the next screen, and while doing so, I'm James Hallmark with the Texas A&M University System. And as Jacob had mentioned, he and I are co-chairing this initiative, and we're very thankful for the commissioner's vision and wisdom in putting together a group like this that could look at the detail. And we'll be talking more about that process here in a few moments. But as was just shared, there's a tremendous opportunity there in Texas, as we have a large number of students who are already entering the pipeline through the community colleges. But that also leads to some challenges, and that's where this next slide focuses. And that less than 35% of the students who start at the Texas Community College end up transferring within 6 years. Well, just imagine what if that number was 40% or 45% or 50 or 75%, the kind of impact that would have on Texas, both in terms of higher education, economic development, the kinds of issues that the commissioner was talking about a few minutes ago in terms of the preparation for jobs. The impact is tremendous if we are able to move the needle on the number of students who continue to progress through these pipelines. In an analysis of the last 10 years worth of data, we found that 83% of the native junior students complete a degree in 4 years, while only 66% of transfer juniors complete in 4 years. Now, let me take a moment to explain that. So in trying to understand the challenges that we're facing, not only is it a matter of them not progressing from the community college into the four-year institution at a rate that we would desire, but once arriving at the four-year institution are not graduating at the rate that we would hope for them to do. We call that in my shop junior cohort. So in comparing a equal point along the way, in this case, when they're both juniors, those who come from a community college and those who come they've been within that four-year institution, the graduation rates are not comparable. And we want to be able to raise the graduation rates for those transfer students, and therefore, again, make a tremendous impact on how they progress through their degree and how they're able to contribute to our state and our culture, society, once they do graduate. So go on over to the next slide. There are some reasons why this is not working as well as we would like for it to. And that's one of the things that the working group is focused on, is trying to identify what some of those challenges are. We have some of those on the screen. I don't want to represent that as a complete list, because to some extent, this information is still evolving and we're discovering challenges along the way. But to give you some sense of the challenges that we're seeing, is that there are some unclear transfer pathways. So a student enters into the pathway at a community college, and it's not always clear how he or she is supposed to progress as they go through that journey toward the baccalaureate degree. There's often misalignment between the community colleges and the universities, where the courses are not as aligned as well as they need to be in order for the student to not need to retake a course or have those excess hours. And so being able to work through those alignment issues and correct them is one of the challenges that we're diving into. And to a great extent, there's an advising challenge of insufficient or confusing information about transfer. How do we get a consistent message? How do we get consistently the right information to all students as they are on this journey? And again, part of the challenges that we're looking at in this particular work group. So we've been working collaboratively to develop and make recommendations that would substantially improve the vertical transfer in Texas. And that's what our working group has been diving into since April, I guess. So let's move on to the next slide.
So board members, what we did at the onset through the vision of Dr. Keller and Dr. Hallmark is we made a decision to bring equal number of representatives from two-year colleges and from universities, and then equally made the decision of bringing in experts. So we identified individuals who are deep in the field of transfer, deep in the field of academic requirements, deep in the field of degree requirements, and not people like me who are much more policy centric and policy folks. And so, and we'll talk about SB 25 in a minute, but we wanted to separate the conversation from the policy gurus and bring in folks who really understood, truly understood the academics. And so we put together a group of 8 individuals that are representative of all universities and representative of community colleges that are geographically well represented of Texas, East Texas and West Texas and North Texas and Central Texas and the Gulf Coast are very well represented in that domain. And so that is that work group. And I have to call out the leadership on this. We actually started our meetings even as the COVID-19 crisis was becoming to be realized among our institutions. So I do want to appreciate their participation, their leaders' participation, because we have, and we'll talk about in a minute, we have been very active since the end of March. And to their credit, they have been engaged in this conversation, even as they were trying to manage COVID-19 back at the campuses. Next slide. So we wanted to show you that the work of this transfer work group is building on some already important groundwork of conversations and policies that already exist in our great state. And I'm going to talk about 2 of those and then invite Dr. Harmark to then take it from there and highlight a couple of others. So as you know, and as Dr. Keller talked about earlier in his comments, in the 2019 legislative session, the Texas legislature authorized Senate Bill 25. So Senator Royce West of Dallas on the Senate side and Representative Chris Turner on the House side co-authored what is now Senate Bill 25 and was signed into law by Governor Abbott. Senate Bill 25 has some good bones, if you will, with regards to the kinds of policy conversations that we are talking about. So for instance, it requires both 2-year institutions and 4-year institutions to report to the coordinating board. Those instances where credit was transferred to university, but not applied to a major. And so that we were able to look at some of the data that we think is important. It also lowered the threshold at which time a student, and whether it's community college student or university student, at which time a student has to declare a degree plan. And so for some of the conversations that we're going to have later about advising that requirement, the students now have to declare a degree plan at 30 semester credit hours. I think it was an important step in that direction. And then lastly, as an example, Senate Bill 25 includes that all academic institutions must publish at least 1 course sequence for every degree program they offer. And so we highlighted SB 25 because it's a sort of a good starting place, but also because it has some elements in there that we think are going to be important for the long term. I'm also going to call out in this preview what the Texas Success Center, which is hosted by my organization, ATTAC, what we have been doing in the transfer area. The Success Center was built about 6 years ago specifically to ensure cohesive institutional policy and practice among the 50 college districts. Certainly as board members of the coordinating board, you understand that there's a wide spectrum of institutional capacity among the 50 college districts. And so we have been working with our 50 colleges and specifically with the provost of each of the 50 colleges to make sure that transfer practice among the 50 colleges is cohesive and uniform, not standardized because we don't prescribe standard rules, but as cohesive as possible. One of the efforts that we have undertaken that is a complement to the transfer conversation is we are now having very thorough conversations with each of the 50 colleges to adopt guided pathways. Guided pathways is intentional, making sure the students enroll and are placed in the degree program, whether it's a meta major or a field of study, but in the degree path, the best fits what they are interested in. And so in expectation that the student will not be changing majors through the course of their journey, in anticipation that those majors now then match up the degrees that are expected when students transfer to universities. So I'm going to call those 2 out and then pivot to Dr. Hallmark.
Yeah, I want to call out a couple also, and I'll go to that second bullet there, the Texas Student Success Council. You may be aware that this was previously led by Melissa Henderson, who of course the commissioner stole from Educate Texas in order to build his team there at the coordinating board, and a great selection, I might add. But the Texas Student Success Council has been in operation for a number of years and operates under the umbrella of Educate Texas. And that entity has been heavily engaged in the transfer conversation for quite some time. I have the pleasure of being the, I guess, vice chair of that particular council. A number of individuals throughout the state, from the university sector, from philanthropy, from state agencies, are in that council. And it comes together to focus on what are those policy issues that are preventing us from having the kind of success that we want for our students in Texas. One of the areas that it has focused on most recently is what it refers to as portability of those credits. And I think that's a useful term. And we use the term transfer in our group, but it's the portability, is how well are we able to use this learning that we've received in one environment to pursue a credential or a degree in another environment. And I think that broader picture is an important thing for us to think about as we move on, whether it's about transfer or other kinds of issues, because that opens up the conversation to competency-based learning. It opens up the conversation to prior learning assessment and those kinds of activities that are not necessarily hours earned at institution X, but still may move the student toward the degree in a timely manner, which is certainly something that we're all focused on. But in addition to competency and prior learning assessment, the Texas Student Success Council is very interested in working hard on how they may view it, how we, I'm in the group, how we may move the needles in terms of how our students are progressing from one institution to another. So again, trying to understand the landscape that our work group fits into, that's an important component of the landscape. Second item I'll mention is the Texas Transfer Alliance. And again, Jacob and I are on the steering committee of that. So these are all very interrelated and working well together. It's a hand in glove relationship. It's not a competitive relationship. But the Texas Transfer Alliance has been in operation a year or two now. I don't remember the exact timing on it. It is hosted by the Dana Center at UT Austin and has a number of external drivers on it. SOVA, the Aspen Institute, probably others, but the idea is to work at the institutional level and at the regional level and trying to align the curriculum and work through the challenges. And so one of the things that the Texas Transfer Alliance has done is that there are 26 institutions in the state, a mix of four-year schools and community colleges, that are working together in this pilot project to identify the specific challenges and transfers that they are having. So it'd be, let's just use an example, a university in the case of, so three of my universities are in this project, but I'll just say A&M Commerce, which is one of the institutions. How is A&M Commerce working with the community colleges that are feeding into A&M Commerce to make that challenge less challenging for the students in terms of the transfer process? So the Texas Transfer Alliance is working with those institutions across the state and is also providing resources to all community colleges and all universities across the state in the transfer conversation. And I would be remiss not to mention the Post-Secondary Innovation Network, if for no other reason. That resides in the commissioner's former office, where he played a significant role in the Post-Innovation Network over the years. And the piece that I would grab from the Post-Secondary Innovation Network is the reverse transfer conversation, which is a tremendously important component for the students to assure they have a credential, to the community colleges, and to the state as we try to move toward these goals. There are many other pieces of the landscape in Texas focused on transfer. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list. We mentioned several regional initiatives here, and we know there are things that aren't listed on the screen, but we wanted to convey that this is not happening in a vacuum, but rather it is a concerted effort across the state in many different venues to try to impact transfer in Texas. Let's move to the next slide. So the purpose of our group is that we've been meeting weekly to collaboratively, a keyword, to make recommendations that are going to substantially improve vertical transfer, substantially improve the applicability of credit to the major, and to reduce the number of excess semester credit hours. So in terms of some specific goals that we have, here it is on the screen. You're gonna hear a little bit more about this as we continue on through through the slideshow, but go ahead to the next slide.
So having been organized, having been given our directives, having understood the lay of the land with regard to Texas work, the group, the task force, true to form to higher education institutions, decided that the next phase would be a learning journey. And so at the leadership with Ray Martinez and his team, they scheduled for the work group five individual learning opportunities for our work group to learn from our colleagues across the union. And you'll see the 5 states there on the screen. And Dr. Hallmark and I are not going to necessarily go through all of them because we want to make sure that we leave time for your questions. But just a couple of things that I would call out from the totality of the 5. I think in all instances, we learned from our colleagues that their situation was unique to their state and their solutions was unique to their state. And I think that was an important call out. The other thing that I would call out in all instances, it took several years and several iterations of work. In some cases, statutory was required. In other cases, it was not required, but it was a heavy lift. And so even though we called them out as sort of model states for us to look at, it was a very heavy lift to get to where they were. And it was an iteration. So in no case did any of these states convey to us that they had solved for X and that they were done and now they would move on to something else. Very iterative process. And then I think the other thing that I would call out that became very clear as we learned from our colleagues across the union is that communication was important. And I think that I will highlight that in the conversations that we're having with the work group now. I lost count, Ray, Dr. Harmack, I lost count as to how many meetings we've had already, but the communication has been fluid and constant. And I think that was an important call out from our colleagues in the other states. But the learning journey became an important part of us grounding ourselves before we dive into it. Next slide. So having learned now from our colleagues in the other states, then what we did is we went into deeper conversations on some of the existing policies, some of the existing tools, if you will, that currently reside in Texas. And we went into each of these areas, and Dr. Harmack and I are going to highlight 2 or 3 just for reference for you. But just know that the work group spent considerable amount of time and effort. The coordinating board team had been instrumental in prepping us by providing a ton of data for the work group to then not just contextualize the conversation, but to actually have real-time data for us to have the conversations. And so I'm going to call out 2 that are on the screen that were subject of the conversations, and frankly, they will be subject of the future conversations after this meeting. And the 2 that come to mind for me is the Texas Common Course Numbering System. The Texas Common Course Numbering System has its genesis back in the 1970s. It was created voluntarily by I think it was the Texas Collegiate and Registered Association as a way of developing a mechanism for tracking and measuring at the student number level the courses that were like courses. It is in place now. All 50 of the community college districts have adopted the course numbering system. And then I believe, I'm going to look at my notes here, but I believe that 19 of our 4-year public universities also have adopted the Common Course Numbering System. The Academic Course Guide Manual is an instrument where 2-year and 4-year community college and university faculty come together and define the course description, the learning objectives, the contact hours that are associated with every lower division course, and especially lower division courses that are made for transfer of credit. For my community colleges, you have to teach the courses in the ACGM in order for it to be eligible for reimbursement for state funding formula. So for us, the ACGM really is sort of our holy cloth with regards to the courses that we teach, and they're an important component of the courses that are now transferable. Dr. Hallmark.
The two I'll focus on are the Texas core curriculum and the field of study curriculum. Senate Bill 25, Jacob's already provided a very good summary of that, so we're not going to discuss it at this time, but understanding that it impacts the conversation. In terms of Texas core curriculum, it goes back to 1987 when the state chose to create a common core curriculum such that across the state, all institutions, all public institutions are required to have the same core curriculum. And so to make sure everybody's understanding, we're talking about this is history and political science and mathematics and those kinds of basic courses that elsewhere around the country might be referred to as general education or some other kind of term. But the Texas core curriculum consists currently of 42 hours. It has varied a bit over years, but the current process is a 42-hour core. And the important component of that for transfer is that if you complete the core curriculum at one institution, you then transfer to another institution, you would not need to retake any component of the core. Now, that sounds fabulous, and it is, but what are the challenges that may still be there? And that's part of what our working group is looking at, is what may be something about the core, and I'm underscoring the word may, but what may be something about the core that could or should be tweaked in order to improve transfer in Texas. Field of study curriculum also has a relatively long history into the 90s, although really it is a fairly recent push. So there are a handful of programs that have existed in the field of study curriculum for a long time, but most of them are relatively recent. And of course, you've taken an action on field of study, or you will be taking an action perhaps in this meeting. What field of study has done is for a particular degree program, we'll say electrical engineering. It has identified courses that the students could take at another institution that would transfer and would be required to be accepted and applied toward the degree in electrical engineering. And so we're looking at the field of study curriculum in terms of what are the challenges and opportunities there. And as we look through these existing transfer policies, I've been very pleased with how the group has looked at these, both in terms of strengths and weaknesses. This has not been a matter of we need to throw out this or throw out that, but rather a good analysis of what is working, what is not, what changes need to be made in order for us to have that kind of outcome that I described a few moments ago in terms of increasing the number of students who are able to progress on to the next degree, decrease the number of excess hours. And in order to look at the existing policies and do that, we believe is a very important step in that process. Let's go to the next slide. There we go. So now we're going to move into the final component of our presentation, and that is discussing the design principles for developing a transfer policy. And so these are kind of broad principles that are driving the ongoing conversation that the work group has. Next slide, please. And I thought there was a little bit more on this slide, but maybe not. But what this provides is a framework for adjusting those policies that we've been talking about, or developing new policies and mechanisms. And there are five principles rather, that we'll be walking through. Here we go. That's what I was expecting I'd see. There'll be 5 principles that we'll be walking through. Jacob is going to take the first 3, and then I'll talk a little bit about the 4th and 5th principles. So go ahead, Jacob, and the next slide, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hallmark. So colleagues, you can see on the board the first 3, and I'll just sort of highlight. We'll try not to read to you, but just highlight sort of why we came to these, and then the sequence. We believe that it was important for us to establish at the onset and at the top of the order that community colleges and universities have equal responsibility to solve for X. That the days of pointing fingers and the days of saying, if only they could have done it, are behind us. That we felt that it was important for us to do our work with this outstanding principle, that we had equal and shared responsibility. We also believe that whatever framework we develop or iterate to, that it has to be seamless and transparent to students. There is much conversation to come, and rightfully so, about academic advising, and it's really important. But academic advising is insufficient if the system and the process is still not clear and understandable to students and families. We know that much of the time, sometimes students seek other students to help them with their advising, and we know that sometimes they reach out to the parents and their families for that. So seamless and transparent process was an absolute principle for us. And then certainly, I think to the third principle, and this is really something that we called out from our colleagues in the other states, and it was really important for our work, that we optimize the transfer rate of students from community college to universities. Important, yes, but our true work is to optimize the acceptance of those credits to a degree program upon transfer. So we wanted to make sure that this stood out as something that was important to us, so that 2 hills down the road, if we come up with a recommendation and it does not move this third needle, we might think about how do we optimize that credit application to degree. Next slide.
So in the fourth design principle, again, it focuses on transparency, as I believe the second one does, but on the second principle, as Jacob was presenting it, is transparency to the student. This is transparency from a different angle, and that is to the institutions. So the institutions, the state, everybody has to have a transparent process that is involving all of the institutions in this formal venue to identify and endorse mechanisms. So what we wanted to make sure, whatever we designed and recommended to you in this process, was something that all of the institutions in the state, the universities and the community colleges, were participating in. And we've had some challenges with participation on some of the existing mechanisms, and that's something we felt like was an important component that we assure happens. And that it's a transparent process, the voices are heard. And that moves well into principle 5. And that is that I'm gonna go to the last sentence, the second sentence in principle 5, is that post-implementation oversight is a key component of this. Is that how will we be not just implementing this, but also have a process whereby all institutions in the state in a transparent manner can engage with presumably the coordinating board in working through challenges that emerge. There's going to be continual challenges, and that's just the nature of higher education. These challenges are really born from all of our desire to improve our product on a continuous basis. And so that's going to create some continuous opportunities for us to get together and assure that there's a transparent process for us to work through the challenges together. And that's that post-implementation oversight. And the first sentence in principle 5, so I'll work backward a little bit on that on principle 5, is adherence by all institutions to what is ultimately adopted. We have some challenges in Texas where there are some outliers where we're not capturing everybody, and we want to make sure that this is a solution that enables all of our institutions to engage and all of our institutions to adhere. So those are the 5 design principles that we have put forward at this point. And again, these are more global principles that are driving the conversation and assuring that anything that we are considering for a specific recommendation must fit this process. Let's go to the final slide. And actually, Jacob and I did not say anything other than we would sing a duet for this final slide. So, but I'll go ahead and take a first stab instead of singing with you, Jacob. But it is a process that we'll be providing our recommendations to the commissioner, and at his discretion to you as the board. And our assumption is that this would ultimately result in recommendations that may impact institutional policy and practice, or state policy and practice. So Jacob, I'll let him talk a little bit about this because I love how he explains big P and little p, but it's an important consideration as we look at these, that it's both institutional practice and state policy. Jacob.
Thank you, James. I appreciate that. So what we are allowing ourselves is that there might be several recommendations that come out of this work that it would apply to institutional practice, institutional policy. And so it would not require agency approval, administrative rules. It would not require for us to go to the Capitol and get new statutory changes. And so we are allowing ourselves for small p institutional changes that we would agree to adopt. And so that our university colleagues will then work with the universities and TAC on behalf of community colleges, work with community colleges for adherence of that. And then certainly there is a possibility, we are thinking of this possibility that some of them might require administrative rule change. And so then those recommendations will come to Dr. Keller for his consideration. I would say that because I miss baseball, I'll use a baseball analog and say that this is the 7th inning stretch. The work ahead is even more critical than the previous 3 months. Thank you.
We'd be happy to discuss and entertain questions at this time if it's appropriate.
Yeah, well, anyway, a very important issue, and since you are contemplating a duet, may I suggest Kumbaya? And anyway, it's a tough issue. What you know, as you work through this, and you change these rules and all this stuff, how can this be measured? And I want to, how can the effectiveness of your policy recommendations, big P, little p, be measured? Because we had the Alamo colleges speak, and I guess it was on this topic, and Jacob actually might have been there. And there's one lady, when asked, just said it was horrible. I mean, the ability of the Alamo colleges to place students, in effectively in universities in a broad area was terrible. And I'm not sure her pessimistic view was shared by everybody, but how can you, as you go through these rules and you try to get the buy-in and all the principles are great and everybody follows the principles, how is this going to be monitored?
Well, I think the Kumbaya is, to jump on that first, is an interesting characterization, because it's been an important component of what this group has done. We felt from the very beginning, and this was designed pre-COVID, so our strategy was to kind of lock everybody in a room for 3 days or 2 days or something like that, and become friends, go to dinner. This was how the group was going to work, and then a month later bring them back in for another 24-hour kind of lock-in, because it to a great extent it's a relationship and trust issue of being able to work through difficult challenges. And so that has been more difficult because we're all meeting just like this. So our meetings look just like this one here. But I will say I have been impressed with the 8 individuals, the 4 community college and the 4 university individuals, and how well they have bonded and worked together. And I would commend my colleagues here on the line. Ray, you've done a great job of bringing the group together. Stacy Silverman, Elizabeth, they really have done a fabulous job of bringing the group together and working through those challenges. But it is a matter of moving to a vision for, here are our goals and what are the things that we need to do to achieve those goals. We discussed that, hammered it out very early, that our goals were very measurable kinds of outcomes. And that is that we wanted more students to be progressing from the community college to the 4-year university to pursue the 4-year degree. We wanted those rates to improve once they got to the 4-year institution. We wanted less excess hours. And so, those are very measurable outcomes that are going to take several years to be able to identify. These are not items that we would know by January whether or not it was effective, but that we really were looking at the long game on this and recognizing that the data that comes in over time will indicate the effectiveness of this effort.
Yeah, well, it's hugely important. I mean, that one stat that you said with the 35%, community college graduates go on to actually transfer, or maybe 35% of community college students transfer. That's kind of a low number, and so you tweak that, as you said, and you really move the needle about 4-year degree attainment. Members, any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, welcome, Wilson. I would just comment that, to me, I see this effort as really capitalizing on low-hanging fruit. I mean, we have students that are in community college that want to transfer. They're already used to the college system. They've already bought into it. So I think this is really, I really commend Dr. Hallmark and Jacob for this effort, because I think this is really an opportunity to easily move the needle just because of the cohort we're dealing with, if we can help them figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, and what's going to be interesting, and I sort of mentioned Kumbaya and tongue in cheek, of course, because I've heard, the one institution in particular, won't name names, said, well, if we don't have control of our academic, course, provisions, we might lose our accreditation. Well, in this particular institution's case, it was absolutely absurd. I mean, but it was, I think, a faculty effort to I don't know, continue control that may go against sort of efficient transfer policy. So there's all sorts of underlying kind of issues that anyway, I'm very pleased that you guys are hashing it out and trying to figure out how can we move this forward, because it's a critical part of the whole state. So anyway, very much appreciate your presentation and your work on this. It's vital.
And Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
This is Fred. Do we still have Dr. Hallmark and Jacob on?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Fred. Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. I really appreciate your work on the work group. As Chairman Stedman and I go to meetings, as y'all do, from the legislature, the Senate Higher Ed Committee, this obviously always comes up. And so I'm glad that Commissioner Keller has put the work group together. And I appreciate both of you collaborating together with community colleges and university college level to really get the students and their parents involvement in this as well. So I guess my question is, I think one of the challenges will be, what I've heard is you've got faculty committees and folks that are, in some institutions that feel like their English courses may not be comparable as a community college to a flagship university. And how are you handling those challenges?
So I'll call out one response, Vice Chairman Farias. So we already have, as we described earlier, a process where community college faculty and university faculty come together and co-develop, co-create the lower division courses that are part of the ACGM. And so that process exists as we learn through this last several meetings. It's not optimized yet. There isn't full participation, and there certainly is not full understanding of that process among our colleagues on both sides of that. So I think we have an opportunity to optimize that and use that instrument so that a university faculty member can really look at the student learning objectives that are in any course and understand that those learning objectives were actually co-developed, even if not by them, but by the university faculty colleagues in those ranks. So I think there's an opportunity for much more optimization on that. I think that with regards to a part of your question and a part of Chairman Stedman's question, one of the critical outcomes will be the reduction of excess credit hours the students have upon completion of university degree. So if you listen to legislators' sort of public complaints, concerns, as we're all hearing in testimony, it's really about their constituents coming to them and saying, I lost 10 credit hours, I lost 15 credit hours. And that really will be a focal point of our conversation. How do we minimize that at all? Not 100% reduction, because I don't think Dr. Hallmark, that either one of us has the expectation that we're going to get rid of all of that. The bottom line is we have 6 independent university systems. We have 50 independent community college districts. And so with that wide range of institutions, there's going to be some exceptions. And I think we're going to accept that. But if we can minimize that, then I think that we can go to the legislature in 2021 literally, not literally holding hands, figuratively holding hands and talk about the potential of the impact in the long term.
I think that's great, Jacob. And you're exactly right. And this also has other ramifications such as earlier degree completion and cutting down on student debt and being able to, have those factors also be solved for a lot of the students. So thank you all for your work and your committee's work group, that is. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's an important, what Jacob was just describing is essential and is a good example of the kind of work that our working group has been focused on. I think one of the smarter things that we did in putting this group together is 8 individuals who understand those details. These individuals are in the weeds and understand those little places where we're having those disconnects much better than I do from my office, much better than Jacob does from his office. And so being able to identify those challenges and work through them. Jacob mentioned earlier about the different states that we heard from, and one of which was SUNY, the State University of New York system. And for whatever reason, his comment as he was visiting with us, it really stuck with me, and that was that this was long, hard, slogging work of bringing faculty together and getting everything aligned. And I knew that before, but it was good to hear it from a system that is recognized for good transfer, that this just took a long time to work through and being able to identify the challenges and fix those challenges. Very much a tedious but necessary work to be done.
Yeah, I agree. Dr. Hallmark, this is Fred again. I agree that that's probably that's why I brought that up. That could be a tedious process, obviously, but it's great that you're having people in the weeds, because that's what this type of topic needs. And the other thing I might recommend, Jacob, is also, and Dr. Hallmark, is looking at the state of Massachusetts. I didn't see that on that list. And the reason is they rank pretty high in education, but I'm not so sure about their transfer issues, but they have so many universities and they always rank very high in higher education. So that might be something to look into, is my suggestion. Thank you.
I thought it was my phone. But yeah, one comment, and I think this dovetails with Commissioner Keller's vision for the coordinating board, and I certainly support it. You're doing, James and Jacob, you're focused on a bottom-up type process. In other words, the people that really understand the weeds, and the coordinating board's role sounds like is more of a facilitator, just providing information and coordination, as opposed to perhaps in the past where we might have been a little more top down and prescriptive in solving this problem. But I think this approach really does make sense. Start with the people that really know the problems, and then work up to bigger policy prescriptions that people can adopt. But it's a hugely important deal for the state of Texas. So I appreciate your work.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just say one more time again, how much I appreciate Jacob and James, their leadership and their colleagues on the working group. And as they mentioned in passing, this was organized pre-COVID, and they've met, I think, more than a dozen times with meetings that are generally like 90-minute meetings. They put a lot of time into this. And deeply appreciative of their efforts and their insights. And as you say, I think it's the kind of recommendations that come out of this kind of process are, I think, more likely to be able to balance those considerations where you need to be sensitive to variations in student needs and institutional missions, with the need to provide clear, much more transparent transfer pathways for students across the state. And so I'm excited about their work, and we'll certainly look forward to bringing an update back to the board. And it could be an important opportunity, as you imply, for us to align better our rules around transfer, so that they can better facilitate a transparent, efficient transfer policy for the state.
Okay, well, thank you again. We're going to Move on to the next agenda item. Agenda item 7 is matters relating to the Committee on Innovation, Data, and Educational Analytics, chaired by Javed Anwar. Javed, do you want to present the committee? You are on mute. Javed? Javed, can you hear me?
Can you hear me,
Yeah,
Chairman?
okay. Yeah, you just got unmuted. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It took a little while to get it unmuted. Thank you. Good morning. Agenda 7, item 7A is the committee chair's meeting review. Thank you for joining us for the matters relating to the Committee on Innovation, Data, and Education Analysis. Item 7A, 7B through 7D were approved on the consent calendar. Agenda item 7E, number 1, is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the proposed amendment to Chapter 1, Subchapter A, Section 1.18 Board Rules concerning the operations of Education Research Center. Dr. Julie Eklund, Assistant Commissioner by Strategic Planning, will be available to answer any question. Dr. Julie Eklund?
Yes, I'm available to answer any questions.
Is there any questions, committee members? If not, do I have a motion to adopt the committee's recommendation to the board regarding the proposed amendments to Chapter 1, Subchapter A, Section 1.18 of Board Rules concerning the operation of Education Research Centers? I have a motion.
So moved, Fred.
Second.
Second, I'm going to call members, when I call your name, please, whether you are voting for or against. Cody Campbell.
For.
Fred Farias.
For.
I guess Ricky Raven is not there, right? Emma Schwartz.
For.
Stuart Stedman.
Aye.
Sam Thorne.
For.
Donna Williams.
For.
Welcome Wilson.
Or
I guess Ricky Raven is not there. Motion passes. The conditions on our, this concludes the portion of our meeting.
Good, thank you, Javed. I'd say the next item, and I don't know if it goes to the main agenda or not, but agenda item is lunch. Well, it's a little too early for lunch, but can I suggest a 5, maybe 7-minute, break, and then we come back at 11 o'clock for the, so like a little break? Is that, Mary, is that allowed?
Sir, that would be a legal question, and General Counsel is saying, yes, sir, that's allowed.
Okay, so we're kind of not breaking for lunch, but just making a break, and we'll be back at 11 o'clock, but 7 minutes.
Stuart, I have a question for you, please.
Sure.
I won't be available at this Zoom anymore because I have to move from this place. So I'm going to excuse myself for rest of the meeting, please.
Okay. Well,
I'm traveling, Stuart.
Yeah, I understand. All right. Well, thank you for your participation so far, and we'll note that we're good on a quorum, so we're okay. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you.
Okay, so everybody back at 11 or so. Okay. That's a pretty short break, I know, but anyway, will allow us to get to our executive session pretty quickly. So anyway, I presume everybody can hear me. The next item on the agenda is agenda item 9, which is matters relating to the Committee on the Academic and Workforce Success, chaired by Dr. Frias. Fred?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for joining us for matters relating to the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success. Agenda item 9B through 9I were approved on the consent calendar. Agenda items 9J is the consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to strategies to incentivize institutions of higher education to develop degree programs in cybersecurity. A report to the Texas Legislature, Senate Bill 6486, Texas Legislature, regular session. Dr. Stacy Silverman, the Assistant Commissioner to Academic Quality and Workforce, will present this item, will be available for questions. Dr. Silverman.
Thank you, Dr. Farias, and good morning to everyone. Yesterday at the cause meeting, I presented slides, and I'll provide a brief review today. Senate Bill 64 required the coordinating board, in collaboration with the Department of Information Resources, to explore ways to incentivize Texas public higher education institutions to develop more certificate and degree programs in cybersecurity and submit a report to legislative leaders and institutions of higher education not later than September 1. Slide 2, please. The coordinating board and DIR, next slide, please. Thank you. The coordinating board and DIR conducted 2 surveys and held a day-long focus group meeting with institutional representatives to better understand the landscape and gain insight into what prompted an institution to develop a new certificate or degree program in cybersecurity. Next slide, please. Based on the survey data and focus group insights, 4 recommendations were developed. The first, provide state funding. Next slide, please. And the second recommendation is to create partnerships with industry. Slide 4. Recommendation 3 is really to develop a standardized curriculum that aligns with national standards. And finally, recommendation 4 is to ensure clear articulation pathways from high school to college, and that the coordinating board should work with TEA, the Texas Education Agency, to develop articulated pathways from high school to college. Again, today I'd like to recognize and thank my staff, Dr. Audra Patridge, for her leadership on the project and for her role serving on the advisory committee with DIR, and the institutional representatives for their input and work on this report, along with the work of the DIR representatives. The committee recommendation is for approval.
Thank you, Dr. Silverman. Are there any questions from board members? Any discussion on this topic? If there's no further discussion, do I have a motion to adopt the committee's recommendation to the board relating to strategies to incentivize institutions of higher education to develop degree programs in cybersecurity? A report to the Texas Legislature, Senate Bill 6486, Texas Legislature, regular session. Do I have a motion?
Wilson, so moved.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Wilson. Do I have a second?
I'll second. Cody Campbell.
Campbell, okay, thank you. Members, when I call your name, please state whether you're voting for or against. Mr. Campbell.
For.
Ms. Schwartz.
For.
Chairman Stedman. Chairman Stedman. Sam Torn.
For.
I'm
Donna
for.
Wilson.
For.
Mr. Wilson.
For.
Again, Chairman Stedman. Okay, so we have a majority and the motion passes. Thank you all. We'll move on to agenda items 9K through 9M3. And those were approved on the consent calendar. Agenda item 9M4 is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the request from the University of Texas at El Paso for a Doctor of Philosophy, PhD, with a major in data science. Dr. Stacy Silverman, Assistant Commissioner for Academic Quality and Workforce, will be available to answer questions. Dr. Silverman.
Thank you, Dr. Farias. At the cause meeting yesterday, I provided the committee with an overview of the proposed program, and institutional representatives were available to address questions. The proposed program would be the first PhD offered in data science in Texas. The committee recommendation is for approval.
Are there any questions or any discussion on the topic? If there's no further discussion, do I have a motion to adopt the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the request from the University of Texas at El Paso for a Doctor of Philosophy, PhD, with a major in data science?
So moved, Sam Torn.
And this is
Mr.
Emma
Torn.
Schwartz. Emma
Mr.
Schwartz, second.
Second by Ms. Schwartz. Thank you. Members, when I call your name, please signify for voting for or against. Mr. Campbell,
For.
Ms. Schwartz,
For.
Chairman Stedman,
For.
Mr. Torn,
For.
Ms. Williams,
For.
Mr. Wilson.
For.
I vote for, so the motion passes. Thank you all. Agenda item 9M5 is consideration of the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the request from Western State University for a Doctor of Education ED major in available to answer questions. Dr. Silverman.
Thank you, Dr. Farias. At the cause meeting yesterday, I presented an overview of the proposal from Midwestern State University to offer its first doctoral program, a Doctor of Education EDD degree in educational leadership. Institutional representatives were available to address questions. The committee recommendation is for approval.
Okay, are there any questions or discussion? If not, do I have a motion to adopt the committee's recommendation relating to the request from Midwestern State University?
So moved. I'll second. Donna Williams.
Please.
So
I think
moved, Sam Torn.
And Donna Williams second.
A motion was made by Mr. Torn, a second by Ms. Williams. Members, when I call your name, please state whether you're voting for or against. Mr. Campbell.
For.
Ms. Schwartz.
For.
Chairman Stedman.
For.
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 We can.
Dr. Farias?
I think Dr. Farias has lost his connection.
Yeah, okay, well, actually, well, no. He's still got a couple of,
So let me send you his script. Just one moment.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
yeah, we hear you now.
Yes.
Okay, I don't know what happened there. We are on agenda item 9R, which is consideration of adopting the recommendation to the board related to suspending the September 1st effective date.
So I'll go ahead and present this item. I think Dr. Farias was going to call on me next. So as you all just heard from Jacob Frere, President and CEO of the Texas Association of Community Colleges, and Dr. James Hallmark, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs for Texas A&M University System, about the important work they are doing. The transfer work group will continue meeting over the next few months, and any recommendations that are developed by the group will be presented to Commissioner Keller and the board for consideration. Pending the ongoing review of transfer initiatives, the committee recommends that the field of study scheduled to become effective September 1 be suspended. These field of study were approved by the board in 2019, but have not yet gone into effect. And again, the committee recommendation is for approval of suspension of these rules. Sorry,
Okay,
they're not rules. The suspension of the field of study.
Okay, are any questions or discussion? If there's no further discussion, do I have a motion to adopt the committee's recommendation to the board relating to suspending the September 1st, 2020 effective date for fields of study previously adopted by the board?
So moved, Donna Williams.
Thank you. We have a motion by Ms. Williams. Do I have a second?
Emma Schwartz, seconds.
Thank you, Ms. Schwartz, seconds. Members, when I call your name, please state whether you're voting for or against. Mr. Campbell?
For.
Ms. Schwartz?
For.
Mr. Stedman? Chairman Stedman? Mr. Torn? Okay, thank you. Mr. Torn?
For.
Ms. Williams?
For.
Mr. Wilson?
For.
And I'm for, so the motion passes. Thank you all. Agenda item 9Q is the consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the request to establish a contract with a higher education artificial intelligence vendor for the virtual advising project ADVI. Gerald Booker is the Assistant Commissioner for College Readiness and Success. He will present this item and will be available for questions. Mr. Booker.
Thank you. Board members, like I said, I'm Jarrell Booker presenting on 9Q. As you may recall, about 18 months ago, you gave us the authority to design and implement a virtual advising system. We call it ADVI. It's an artificial intelligence chatbot coupled with well-trained near-peer advisors. It has about 1,200 responses on it currently, but we want to, make that tenfold if possible. What we do is we take those near-peer advisors, and if the artificial intelligence chatbot is unable to answer, the near-peer advisors can get on and respond or go a little further with the students. In addition, the chatbot's able also to reach out to students. So if students opt in and they want to get nudged or run campaigns around these students as far as reminders for FAFSA, reminders for applications, the system's able to do that also. Originally, we partnered with the University of Texas to help design and implement the program, but now we want to take a more scalable strategic approach to our Advise Texas and ADVI programs. So we're trying to move the program in-house. Moving it in-house will allow us to increase student access to advising resources, as well as provide assistance to a greater number of graduating high school seniors, college students, and even adult workers or people with some college and no degree. Just so you know, leadership which includes Commissioner Keller and Ray Martinez, Deputy Commissioner Ray Martinez has had a sense of urgency, particularly with what's happened with COVID-19. This previous graduating class is in need of a lot more services and help right now, and ADVI allows us to do that immediately and in the future as this thing continues. We'll be able to reach more students. We'll be able to add additional advisors. More importantly, we'll be able to strengthen the content knowledge base of the AI system once it's in-house. Therefore, we're asking for approval to have our own relationship, our own partnership with an AI chatbot vendor in order to do this while we bring it in-house. We ask for favorable approval.
Thank you, Mr. Booker. Are there any questions or discussions? Any questions for Mr. Booker on this? I think ADVI is going to be a great, as I mentioned yesterday, the committee, a great addition for parents and students for advising. So good work on that, Mr. Booker and your staff and the commissioner. I know that this is very important. And also, as Melissa Henderson mentioned, the foundation is very involved in this as well to help out, which is great. Do I have a motion to adopt the committee's recommendation to the board relating to a request to establish a contract with a higher education or artificial intelligence vendor for the virtual advising project ADVI?
Emma Schwartz will move.
Thank you. Ms. Schwartz makes the motion. Do I have a second?
Second, Donna Williams.
Thank you. Second by Ms. Williams. Members, when I call your name, please state whether you're voting for or against. Mr. Campbell.
For.
Ms. Schwartz.
For.
Chairman Stedman.
Aye.
Mr. Torn.
For.
Ms. Williams.
For.
And I vote for, I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson.
For.
I also vote for. Motion passes. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this concludes the agenda items related to the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success.
Thank you, Fred. Let's see, next item is agenda item 10, matters relating to the Agency Operations Committee chaired by Ricky Raven. The Vice Chair, Emma Swartz, will present these items as Ricky is not able to be with us today. Emma?
Great. Good morning. During the Agency Operations Committee meeting yesterday, the committee approved the following items. Minutes from the April 23rd, 2020 Agency Operations Committee meeting, amendments to the board operating policies and procedures, request for qualifications to conduct the audit of the agency-wide financial statements for fiscal year ended August 31st, 2020, and to enter into a contract with the selected auditing firm. The annual internal audit plan for fiscal year 21 was discussed, and also the annual compliance monitoring plan for fiscal year 21. The committee also received a report on grants and contracts, an update on the fiscal year 2020 key security initiatives implementation roadmap, an update on the performance evaluation process for direct reports to the Commissioner of Higher Education, a review of fiscal year 20 financial report, a report of the audit of the agency-wide financial statements for fiscal year 2019, an update on internal audit reports and activities, and an update on compliance monitoring reports and activities. Moving on to agenda item 10B, it's a report on grants and contracts. This item was approved on consent. Agenda item 10C is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board regarding the approval to 1, issue a request for qualifications to conduct the audit of the agency-wide financial statements for fiscal year ended August 31st, 2020, and 2, to enter into a contract with the selected auditing firm subject to the approval of the board chair, vice chair, and chair of the Agency Operations Committee, with options to renew the contract for up to 3 additional years. This item was also approved on consent. Agenda item 10C is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the annual internal audit plan for fiscal year 2021. This item was approved on consent. Agenda item 10E is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendations to the board related to the annual compliance monitoring plan for fiscal year 2021. This item was also approved on consent. And finally, agenda item 10F is consideration of adopting amendments to the board operating policies and procedures. This item was also approved on consent. And that concludes the Agency Operations Committee agenda.
Thank you, Emma. Let's see, for agenda item 11A, the board will meet in closed session to deliberate the following matter. Pursuant to Texas Government Code section 551.074, the board will meet in closed session to discuss the performance evaluations of the Commissioner of Higher Education and internal auditor, since these positions report directly to the board. No other business of the board will be discussed before we reconvene in open session, and no votes will be taken in open session. So anyway, does everybody have that email that Mary sent this morning? Because what we're going to do, we're going to get out of this session, and you're going to click on the Zoom meeting for the executive session. But those 2 links are in the email that she sent to member board this morning. So everybody okay with that transition? Okay. All right. So yeah, good. All right. So the time is now 11:19 a.m. and members, the executive session will be held via video conference. So please exit the video call we've used for the open part of the meeting and click on the video link provided to you this morning. Okay, so let's leave this meeting, and then hopefully we'll see each other in the next Zoom meeting. Good luck. All right, the executive session has concluded. No action was taken during the executive session. The time is now 12:19 p.m. The board is now reconvened in regular session. So I'm going to make the motion that I move that the board adopt the evaluations of the commissioner and internal auditor as discussed in executive session. So do I have a second?
Second, Donna Williams.
Okay, second by Ms. Williams. Any discussion? Well, hearing none, if you can say aye or no, depending on your vote, when I call your name. Let's see, Mr. Raven, Mr. Anwar are not present. Mr. Campbell?
Aye.
Dr. Farias?
Aye.
Ms. Swartz?
Aye.
Horn?
Aye.
Ms. Williams?
Aye.
Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Well, motion passes, and that concludes our meeting, subject to a motion to adjourn and a positive vote on that motion. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Fred.
Oh, second is Emma.
Okay, motion by Dr. Farias, second by Ms. Swartz. When I call your name, please state whether you're voting for or against. Mr. Campbell?
For.
Dr. Farias?
For.
Ms. Swartz?
For.
Mr. Torn?
For.
Ms. Williams?
For.
Mr. Wilson?
For.
And I vote also to adjourn. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time and very, very good meeting.
All right.
Thank you all.
Guys,
Goodbye.
Have
Stay
a great day.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Thanks.
Thank you.